Please stand.
Please be seated. I open this public session of the Doctoral Examination Committee of the School of Business and Economics. From the Christian origins of VU Amsterdam to the polychromatic academic community that we are today, our scientific practice is intertwined with fundamental values and a sense of wonder. Prior to the examination, I invite the candidate to give a brief explanation of the research on which the thesis is based. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear Rector, dear audience, this short presentation summarizes my research on simple rules heuristics. The literature on heuristics shows that managers create and use simple rules to make strategic decisions in dynamic markets. And they share these rules to their teams and organizations for coordination and alignment. Practitioners' literature abounds with examples of famous simple rules heuristics, such as Jack Welch's famous only keep businesses that are or can be number one or number two in their industries, or the more recent one used by Jeff Bezos: every internal team in Amazon must be small enough so it can be fed with 2 pizzas. However, despite being such popular and beneficial tools for deciding, strategizing, and organizing, our understanding of how these simple rules emerge and of their roles is limited. While most research focuses on the what, this is part of our initial investigation, what means that indeed managers use these things in their decision making. Less attention has been paid on how they emerge, and also on what are their roles, especially at the individual level. Furthermore, a manager who might read research on simple rules or on heuristics might be puzzled to find out from some studies that heuristics must be avoided, and from other studies that heuristics must be adopted. This prompted me to focus the research of my dissertation on understanding how and why do managers create and use heuristics. I addressed this dual focus with 4 studies, and I mapped them on that matrix. A conceptual and an empirical study for addressing the how, the origins and life cycle of heuristics, and the systematic literature review, and the second empirical paper to address the why, the roles of heuristics. The 2 empirical studies draw data from 2 samples, one of 31 CEOs, and this was addressed in 2 waves, and the second one on 32 top managers, which is addressed also in 2 waves. What did we find? First of all, investigating the how, we found that even when when it's born in a collective setting, simple rules heuristics emerge from the insight of one individual, of one person. And actually, it's not one insight, it's three insights. Managers, we saw that managers understand their failures through a triple insight. And the insight is what was not true, the flawed assumption that they had and that caused the failure. The second one is what is true instead, so a new principle. And the third one is how can we apply this in practice? And the last two insights are articulated into two young simple rules heuristics. And this is one of the key findings of our research, which is the fact that simple rules heuristics emerge in pairs. And this is illustrated by almost 100 such pairs harvested from our respondents. What we found next is that managers develop and mature their simple rules heuristics. They do this through testing and also obviously reinforcing against the ever-changing environment. They adapt them, they refine them, and not least, they make them like proverbs. They proverbialize them. Following insights from the science of proverbs, from paremiology, I identified several proverbial markers in simple rules, which are rhyme, repetition, symmetry, parallelism, shortness, and humor. This makes the simple rules more memorable, easier to pass on, and easier to share to other people. Finally, we saw that these are institutionalized through two ways. The, let's say, hard adoption way is done under hierarchical or collective authority. So when the CEO or the boss says so, then it becomes policy, or through soft adoption under authority from experience. When a more experienced manager tells you this, then you take it as a guideline. Moving now to the why. We answered several calls for an integrative view on heuristics across programs, and we performed a systematic literature review to understand the antecedents and the outcomes of heuristics. This review makes sense of the divide between the so-called positive and negative view on heuristics. And the first thing that we noticed is that this divide can be explained. We made sense of it by realizing that the two paradigms have in fact two different research objects. While reflex heuristics, which are studied by the heuristics and biases approach, are done when people are pay less attention, have less knowledge or less experience, and they lead to negative outcomes. The other ones, the positive view heuristics, which are deliberate heuristics studied by the simple rules approach and the fast and frugal approach, they are distilled from failure by autonomous and experienced manager, and they lead to a series of positive outcomes. Last but not least, we stumbled upon a very interesting phenomenon. Usually these outcomes are studied at the collective level, but we investigated what are the outcomes of simple rules heuristics at individual level of the person who created them. And we found that aside from very pragmatical rules on how to select clients or manage finances, manager distilled simple rules for themselves to change and to grow. Usually in our research, from micromanaging to trusting people and delegating. And specifically, we found that they create simple rules and apply simple rules for unlearning mindset and behavior that they now consider detrimental, for learning again instead new mindset and behavior that they consider beneficial, and then to grow towards even a new identity. This dissertation primarily contributes to the literature on managerial heuristics, but also to theory integration with closer neighbors like organizational learning or knowledge management, and even to more distant subjects such as paremiology or habit change. It proposes process models for how simple rules heuristics emerge and develop. It proposes an IPO framework that integrates different views on heuristics, and it discovers a new role at the individual level for simple rules heuristics, which is for self-change. I will conclude by saying that obviously this is not only for academic purposes. Managers who may read this research will learn how to create their own portfolios of simple rules, and also in a collective for team meetings, for instance, they can lead lessons learned meetings towards articulating their lessons into a simple rule, and then the simple rules is not archived in a drawer, but it's archived in, let's say, the collective memory of their team. We live in an era in which artificial intelligence disrupts how humans work. The future will belong, I believe, to those who understand how the human mind and artificial intelligence can work together. Herbert Simon famously proposed heuristics as means through which both machines and people learn and decide. It is funny that the machine's use of heuristics is thoroughly researched, and the humans not so much. And I believe that this dissertation aims to advance knowledge about how and why our minds create these fascinating tools. Thank you.
Thank you. May I invite the committee to take their places at the table. May I hear if the candidate is prepared to defend the thesis?
Rector, on your authority and as authorized by the College of Deans and in accordance with the Doctoral Examination Committee in the School of Business and Economics, I am prepared to defend my thesis entitled Simple Rules Made Simple, the Origins and Outcomes of Managerial Heuristics in order to obtain the degree of Doctor of Philosophy.
Thank you. May I invite colleague Professor Lechner, Professor of Entrepreneurship at Lewis Business School, to take the floor and ask a question. First of all, we are very happy to have you here participating in this defense ceremony.
Thank you very much. Is it working? Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, let me compliment with you very insightful thesis in which you were able to combine different literature streams around the same concept, but also asking relevant questions. So combining, which is relatively rare, the theoretical know why with relevant implications for practice, and a very thorough work, which you could also use your professional network, which actually led to new insights. So let me congratulate for deep work and thorough work that you have done with your thesis. Now, on the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, I would like to ask you, as you have observed or better interviewed managers about the emergence of heuristics, when do you actually know that it is a heuristic?
Learned opponent, thank you for your kind words. And I will start answering your question by underlining something very relevant for our research. While these tools are really ubiquitous, very useful, a lot of managers have no idea that they exist. They don't know. And the fact, like, for instance, Basel and Brühl showed that they come around as a coordination of the two systems or the two types of processing was also observed in our research. Most of them had them, but they did not know they had them. They, for sure, do not call them heuristics, But once you prompt them, they discover that have a clear set of rules, and they are some of them during the interview articulated them for the first time, but they said, if I can quote a respondent, I just said it now, but we apply it in our organization for 3 years. So sometimes to sum up, sometimes they don't even know, but they apply it. Let's say sense making, if we go to Vike, he says that the effort of sense making is done also through enactment. So they know they are doing it, but it's tacit knowledge. If we apply the circle proposed by Nonaka, sometimes the first time they articulate it, they make it explicit is during the interview. Others have a more, let's say, reflective mind, and they do this purposefully. And they are those which were on a scheme over there, who already turned them into policies. So they articulate it very well. They don't know they are called heuristics, but they know about simple rules. For instance, in practitioners' literature, the book Principles by Ray Dalio is, let's say, an aggregate of simple rules, but they don't call it like this. And they make their own, and they put them forward into their organization. I think I can elaborate one moment more, because I think I can find another sense of your question. There's a lot of types of heuristics. So sometimes if we go to Kahneman and Versi's understanding of heuristics in terms of heuristics that generate biases, our research found that these are in the same larger class. They are rules of deciding based on fewer information or fewer resources that reach satisfying results, but they differ very much from the heuristics most of my research has focused, which is the ones we learn, not the ones that are innate, the ones we apply consciously, and the ones we do on purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I continue the opposition by inviting Professor Gerpot, who is a professor of leadership at WHU Otto Weisheim School of Management, to take the floor. Also, very welcome to you, and we're very happy to have you here participating in this defense ceremony.
Thank you so much, and thank you for allowing me to participate here online. I very much enjoyed reading your thesis, and I thought you did an amazing job in the introduction to clearly outline your research question and to also guide us as a reader through your thesis. You presented the framework again on the how and why and the conceptual and empirical. Very impressive that you really managed to cover the whole, all 4 areas that could follow from that. And since the papers on the how side are so well published already, I spent some more time on thinking more deeply about the why side. So your chapter 2 and chapter 5. And I would like to start with a question on this nice framework that you actually developed. So on the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, I would like to zoom into the framework and ask why you positioned your antecedents. So low knowledge, low attention, you said, is what can switch on the reflex heuristics. High knowledge, high attention kind of switches on the deliberate heuristics part. Why did you position those as antecedents? And because I'm a more quantitative researcher, I really wondered, why isn't it more like a moderator that decides on which path I kind of end up on? So that's the first part of my question. And the second part is then, if I am now on one of these parts, so I'm either on the deliberate heuristics pathway or on the reflex heuristics pathway, you then said it either goes into positive or negative consequences. But in the future research section, you say, but maybe this can be a little bit more ambiguous, and there might actually be also crossover effects, how I would call it, that things can end up being a reflex heuristic can also be very positive, or the other way around. Whether then in the second part you can elaborate a little bit more on how this is possible, what you could think of concretely, how I might have then a crossover effect at the end of the model.
Learned opponent, thank you for the kind words. And let me go straight to answering the first question. I agree that this could be seen as a moderator, that because it's the same phenomenon, and we found that the lack of it leads to something, and the presence of it leads to the opposing. So the lack of it leads to falling into the trap of reflex heuristics, and the presence of attention and knowledge leads to distilling and then applying simple rules or deliberate heuristics. We decided, we thought about proposing a model which involves these constructs as moderator. However, the method that we used, which is a literature review, through the coding of the papers that we have analyzed, they were specifically outlined as something that happens beforehand and does not influence the choice. But because this is one other, let's say, thing we propose for the future, that there is cross-pollination between streams, because what we observed is that between the so-called negative view, the heuristics and biases authors, and the authors from the fast and frugal and simple rules heuristics, there are no papers that are co-authored. The people stick into their own, let's say, stream of literature and paradigm. And we saw that these researchers were analyzing actually two parallel processes. They did not, so by making our sample of papers about managerial heuristics in general, we very quickly distinguished between the two streamlines, and they both said it's like this, and because of this, it happens to happen in this way or the other way. However, this is just an interpretation. So I would like to thank you for proposing this view. And while this paper has received a first R&R for IJMR, I believe we can make it better with this insight. Let's test whether we can move from what we learned in the systematic literature review to proposing these two concepts, knowledge and attention, as moderators. My answer to your second question would be, any model is imperfect. Any model is just a simplification of reality. Therefore, we found that our model of what is in the literature might be simplistic. And by the way, this is what the three anonymous reviewers said about our first model. It cannot be so that some things are positive and some things are negative and they don't cross over. Moreover, the studies on which were started by Amos Tversky and Kahneman in the 70s and continued these days into the heuristics and biases program, outline very clearly, and Gigerenzer is adamant about this, that these are born from evolutionary learning. So we don't learn them as individuals, we learn them as a race. They are universal, like anchoring, for instance. They are universal. However, if we admit or that the hypothesis that they are evolutionary, then evolution works for the benefit of us. Therefore, they must have some good, let's say, outcomes. Therefore, we propose over there that both paradigms should focus to analyze whether reflex heuristics, which are only treated in a negative way, could sometimes, or perhaps often, have positive outcomes. On the other side, when deliberate heuristics, people that managers know they learned and apply them purposefully, are always treated as mostly positive, we only discovered one paper which addresses good simple rules and bad simple rules, which proposes this. And we would like to extrapolate from that to see whether there are conditions under which we make, and By the way, we stumbled upon such rules in the empirical study, with people saying, I do not pay my supplier until they call 3 times. So that's a simple rule. It's not necessarily a positive one unless it's for their own cash flow. But I would like to we proposed that sometimes the positive, let's say, simple rules might have negative outcomes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I continue the position by inviting Dr. Rauch, Assistant Professor of Strategy at Copenhagen Business School, to take the floor. Also very much welcome to you.
Thank you
and you
so
have the floor.
much.
It's automatic.
Okay. First of all, I like to applaud you for the question you're asking, and the way you structure, I think, in a very systematic way throughout your dissertation, your guiding question. And by doing so, I think you tackle, and you have nicely described it as well right now, a conversation that is actually very contested. And you have various key players and also very senior, very famous authors that have very opposing views. So you asking, with the work of your dissertation, a grand question, which I think is very laudable in that sense. So on the authority of the rector and by the virtue of my right, I'd like you to elaborate on your data analysis processes with a particular focus on your empirical papers, and in particular on focusing how you coded for heuristics.
Learned opponent, thank you for your kind words. And I must tell you that reading the debate, not in academic papers, but I saw them in a practitioner's paper, articles between Gerd Gigerenzer and Kahneman and Tversky. This is what sparked my initial interest for this, which later turned into a research topic for my dissertation. So this debate is actually what sparked my interest for it. Answering your question now, it has been so going from the research paradigm, we thought of applying a grounded theory, but it's not a grounded theory approach 100% going into the jungle, like Strauss and Corbin said, and just discovering what is. You could say that it is the case for the second empirical paper, for the one addressing the why, so the outcomes for individuals. But for the first one, we went with an aim. So we went with the large aim and with the topic. We went with heuristics. Obviously, we went back and forth, even from designing the interviews, from literature to respondents. But we prompted our respondents with open questions to tell us something significant about their history. We did not say heuristics in the guide was not about heuristics. So they told us about what they learned. What would they say to somebody who they prepare for the same job? What would they say to themselves 10 years ago? Stories like this, and then elaborate with open questions. Then, as being discovering the academic way of doing things, I discovered the Joya method of analyzing qualitative data, and I must admit that I did not trust it. I had a very beautiful Excel file with all my questions and their answers. Therefore, that is what my respondents say. But then, because, by the way, this is a very good simple rule heuristics, trust the process, even if you don't know what's at the end of it. I structured, I went religiously through the Joya method, the 4 steps actually, not only the 3. So turn like Joya proposes, don't have the structure, stay like an image, make it a movie. So we made it like a process. we discovered something very interesting. We discovered that the most interesting insights were not the answers to the questions that we asked. We discovered that by coding, and we used mostly open coding, but very often we used, for instance, for the simple rules themselves, that is in vivo coding. We found out that people tell very important things, answering other questions, giving a different answer, or answering a different question than what you asked. But it's only the process that made us discover this. So we started with coding in small words, and we discovered that this is not proper. We had to add verbs to understand, or at least a qualifier, is this good, is it is bad, and then a short story. And then we did not use a special software, but we use Excel, and we anonymized every code. So we just put them all in the same raw data spreadsheet, and then try to apply the process. So make little groups and label them and do the same thing again in order to extract the constructs for them. Then the co-authors went through the same thing, and if for my next one, I would very interestingly, sparked by the research, they see what an artificial intelligence might make of the codes, not of the texts, not of the transcripts, but of some codes, just to see. I must add just one more thing. It was iterative. At least for the paper based on CEOs, we went through, I think, 5 Julia structures. So they all made sense, but they did not tell the story and did not actually respond exactly to the research question. So we made it clearer and clearer, and on different levels, on higher level or abstractization, until it made sense like a proposed theory.
I welcome Professor Cornelissen, Professor of Corporate Communication and Management of Rotterdam School of Management at Erasmus University, to take the floor. Welcome here.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Just to echo what my colleague said, I think it's a fantastic thesis. I'm not an expert in heuristics, but I learned a lot. And it's really nice to see not just the multiple studies, but you really stay with the subject. So you were really enthusiastic, as we're also appreciating now, about the topic, and you stayed with it. So that's really a big compliment, I think, for the work. Obviously, I also have a question. So on the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, what I find intriguing, and like any academic, I ask questions in terms of what I find interesting myself in the work, or at least what resonated with me. You have this analogy with proverbs, and I found that really interesting. So these heuristics are sort of folk wisdom, so simple maxims that managers make up themselves. They may spread, they may work for them, over time as a simple rule, or at least as encapsulating a simple rule. And it may also become idiomatic for an entire community. And I remember years ago reading a paper by Carl Weick, who you mentioned, on flight deck carriers. And he in that paper, there's sort of embedded that there were 4 idiomatic phrases that people on flight deck carriers used. And I forgot what they were, but it was something like, don't get into something you can't get out of, and something with a cloud. So it's not the silver lining, but something like that. And it was pretty much as you said. So it's depicting a scenario that can be unpacked in many ways, hence the different pairs of implications that you found. So one thing that I found interesting in that view of heuristics as idiomatic phrases, maxims, to me, it's sort of folk wisdom being captured, sense making, but it's not Gigerenzer, it's not Tversky and Kahneman, it's not the cognitive shortcuts and the behavioral paradigm that is cognitive behavioral paradigm that is attached to it. So, so given your fascination with the proverb and the idiomatic analogy, could you not have a stronger view as to what really heuristics are? I mean, at one level, you say they are these proverbial phrases and maxims. And on another level, in the literature review, you pay your respects, obviously for good reasons, again, to the cognitive paradigm. So what do you think yourself really on that? Because they're not the same, I think, as you also allude to in your thesis.
Thank you, learned opponent. I appreciate your kind words, and I can tell you that my say enthusiasm on sticking with the subject was an important part of my intrinsic motivation to go through this process. So you have to be passionate, and perhaps that's why I stuck with the same topic. In order to answer your question, which indeed sparks sense-making process right now, and I recognize this from my interviews, when somebody starts speaking more slowly and make pauses, stop and have that person have the dialogue in their head. I sometimes, when especially when I published articles in practitioners' literature talking about simple rules, not necessarily heuristics, because that frightens people. Simple rules are sometimes, the reader associate them with simplistic, which is not the case at all. And obviously there's a difference between the universal ones studied by the heuristics and biases program, and these ones which are let's say invented, created, distilled, sometimes without them knowing, but then articulated into proverbs. And it happens not only in management or in the personal growth of managers, which is not exactly management, which emerged from the other study. It happens in academia. For instance, my supervisor, Chris Vickert, whom I thank here, also Svetlana, thank you very much, told us, the whole cohort in the first year, that conclusion should be, in a good paper, conclusion should be at page 35, and I gave that as an example in EGOS, and Professor Eisenhardt was there, and she says, yes, I have the same, I heard the same. So they go through a very complex process of individual and then collective sense making, and it's done through enactment and refining. They are not simplistic, they are profound. And my analogy with proverbs makes the same thing, and they're not only profound, they are constantly tested. So the content is constantly tested with the environment into iterative applying them into various situations. And also their form changes. So their form is not only, we discovered those proverbial markers, which it's interesting that Chapin, which is the main author that we found in paremiology that treats how they come about, how proverbs come about. Most of his research gives examples from management, from for instance, from financial managers who have a lot of such simple rules. But the articulation itself is a process of sense making, because like Vike says, enactment, we paralleled Croissant's 4I organizational learning model with Vike's model of sense making, and with what we propose as a model of how in this special setting, which is heuristic, simple rules heuristic, they emerge. And what they both say is that schematically they offer in Croissant's example 4 stages, or in Vike's many stages, but actually that's reiterative, that's actually overlapping and going back and forth. And we discovered that it happens the same. So in content, they are profound and then tested. In form, they are shaped to be used for the person. They are more memorable. They're applied every day, especially, for instance, for individual use, when your reflex is to do the opposite. So when your reflex is to micromanage, when you give that to yourself and it's memorable, it stays there, then you apply it. But also for organizations. I do just a little more sense making now to understand that I realize one more thing. I don't know what they are. and I believe we don't know what they are as a literature. So the literature on heuristics, we started in the introductory chapter. We proposed to follow like Dane and Pratt did for instance the same thing, to aggregate from I think 25 different definitions to synthesize a new definition. But I'm not sure that this is the only effort that we need. We need to have a conversation between the different streams and understand what is common and what differentiates different particles, and then to understand whether because a proverb is not only cognitive, it's intuition and insight go hand in hand with analyzing. Like one of our respondents said, so I will give you the first phase. The first phase is, I did not even understand that it's memorable, but when I say it to my people, they start taking notes. So she did not know it's like a proverb. If this is the case, then we should decide whether, for instance, like Evans and Stanovic propose, there's always a conjoint effort of the both type of processing that go either in a default interventionist or in smaller circles, let's say. It's a synergy. I'm sorry, it's a long answer, but I'm passionate about this.
It's fine. Thank you for your answer. We continue the opposition with Professor van Burg, Professor of Organizational Theory here at Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. On the authority of the Rector and by virtue of my right, I'm happy to continue with this opposition. And first of all, I have to admit that I also enjoyed reading your thesis, but it's kind of a repetition of the same comments. So you have heard it enough several times. So let me move over to my critical question there. We've been debating a bit about what are heuristics and how do you find them. I think I would like to go one step further in terms of methodology. So you used in your empirical chapters interviews as a means of capturing heuristics, or capturing the simple rules, I have to say. And we know interviews are great for several reasons, to capture the what people feel and their subjective perspectives on things, etc. At the same time, we know that interviews tend to commit biases as well, in terms of, well, people tell things they might do, whether they don't do them. Actually, they tell espoused theories and other theories in use. And we take also with retrospective biases, for instance. Well, that's not probably a big deal here, but I'm a bit worried about the theories in use and the espoused theories. As your assumption, at least, is, and sometimes you also make this explicit, is that the proverbs or the simple rules that they tell you, they actually guide their behavior. And I would like to question that. So to what extent are you sure that these simple rules actually guide behaviors of the managers that you interviewed?
Learned opponent, again, prompted, your question prompted my effort of sense making. Let's hope it ends with something. I will answer bluntly. We can't through the studies that we conducted. We proposed as first, for instance, a next step, for instance, going and moving the research at the team level or even the organizational level without the manager, to see what happened in the organization if the manager applies them, if there are changes, if, for instance, given our second empirical study, if the manager did indeed steer away from micromanaging, and it's not only espoused, but it's the theory in practice. I will stay with the same paradigm, with the theory in practice and espoused theory, to tell you that it might explain in itself what they did, and this for us, for me, it was a token of veridicity. It's not for sure, but it supports that we have stumbled upon something of value there, because when they said, many respondents said, we do this like this, we do this for several years, we do this, I tell this in the first one-to-one when I hire some people, so I tell them to do this to clients, to in their activity. So but they did not know. It was not something they addressed as a concept in itself. They did not know they have, for instance, a respondent said, if we stay for another 3 hours, I will make a decalogue, but now I will stick with this decalogue of 3. Our interview stopped at 3. Let's investigate 3 simple rules. Some people said more than this, they could not help it. But they say, I did not even know I have them. So, but we practiced them already. That was repeated. And like in my previous example with when to pay the suppliers, it's not necessarily something to be proud of. So some of them showcase their theory in use, which now is the first time it's espoused, and it's the same in let's say shameful. They really specifically asked for the anonymization so that the suppliers never read how they get paid. There's also, and we have addressed this in limitation, there's also the danger of retrospective sense making. And it could be the case that they think they might have developed this and applied this, and it could not be true. We cannot test this unless we move the level of research away from the individual manager and from the subjectivity and towards even measuring or asking other people.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a second round, so I invite Professor Lechner to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Let me start with a premise. You know, as human beings are characterized by bounded rationality, these cognitive limitations do not only apply to decision making, but also to our language capacity. So it's attributed to Schopenhauer, the quote where he said that with our language we are even unable to describe perfectly a rubber, which is a relatively simple thing. And that turns me to my question. So on the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, I would like to ask you, given that you have done interviews and you forced somehow the interviews to extract their knowledge, are simple rules more than a human effort to describe complex situations or complex solutions?
Learned opponent. Again, thank you for making me think of perhaps future research. I believe they are. I don't know yet what. I will try to propose research topics. I believe they are, and this is prompted by some of our respondents saying, you can take this process and travel the country and you will make people have a sense making. They did not say like this. People make peace with their minds or make people understand what they think. It's in the end, when it's out there, when the simple rule is matured and sometimes shared, it acts like a proverb. It acts like a guideline towards decision making, which is formulated in words that obviously have the same meaning for everybody, but sometimes they are successfully used even in coordination and communication. So they are clear. One of my respondents said that especially clarity and brevity are what she tries to do in order to be decisive and not leave room for interpretation. And I thank her for that. What I think is that perhaps taking a glimpse of the second empirical study, which is at what individual managers do with simple rules in order to transform themselves, it could be the case that these are more than this. These are, let's say, instruments not only for decision making, which might seem abrupt and cold. They are instruments for growth and instruments for developing ourselves as human beings and organizations. And I believe that if at the individual level, you make sense of your position in life or who you are now, to go to, let's say, extract something from identity theories, and whom you want to become, and understand what is wanted by yourself and by the others. This is it cannot at this course as a short way, let's say a Bible towards what you want to become. So it's more than a decision making. It could be a way of life, that at the individual level. It could be a code of conduct for beyond pragmatical decisions at organization, team or organization. It could be what are we about and how do we translate this into, let's say, a decalogue of ourselves. So it can be something to reflect identity and identity work.
Thank you for your answer.
Can I invite Professor Kerpot to continue the discussion?
Thank you very much. So I would like to build on what you just said in terms of the practical implication. So on the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, I would like to come to the chapter 5, which is your other part of the story of why do managers behave that way. And you just said developing ourselves as human leaders, that's something that we could do. And in the chapter, you also have like a lot of thoughts on this, and you develop these 4 different phases that we might want, or managers might want to go through. And in this chapter, you also have some brief practical implications. So now that you started that, and being a professor of leadership, that's obviously the part I'm really curious about. How concretely would you think this could be implemented in a leadership course? Maybe also looking forward in this collaboration with AI, that AI also kind of builds on heuristic, uses heuristics. We might need heuristics as leaders to work with AI recommendations, a lot on AI and leadership and how this goes together. So how concretely would you tell me should we include it in a leadership course that people now work with this?
Learned upon, and that is something that preoccupies me as well. What I do aside from this research is being involved in managerial education for managers. So this is why we come in contact with a lot of managers and entrepreneurs. We have done this through the interviews. I do this through my professional life and also in my personal life. And I saw, for instance, I will try to find one way to embed this in a leadership course. I don't know if I can find an AI use or an AI inspiration for this, but let's try. I discovered, and I have seen this on a personal level, but did not actually make sense of it. But perhaps I made sense of it personally, but then through my research, I articulated clearly. It's not that leaders grow slowly. They have crises, and many of them told me exactly this. They associated their context of making sense of their failures and translating them into simple rules with, I went to therapy for this, I did not sleep at night. It's actually a crisis. And then if you look at the process of becoming a leader, you realize that what you did before, for instance, your very good job as a specialist, is not enough. And then you realize you are not enough, which again goes to identity work and also identity undoing, because they see they are not enough and they are something that does not work anymore. So for instance, being individualistic does not work anymore. And I believe that what can be done is it's twofold: to inspire them to articulate their failures into lessons they might learn now. So there's a process which goes like inspired by the triple insight. Can you think of a failure that you had as a leader? And then can you please reflect, and this can be done, for instance, with a mentor or with a coach or with somebody senior. Can you reflect, can you translate what happened after the failure into three sentences? Before I thought that this is the case, then after the failure, or the failure made me realize that in fact, it's not the case. This is the case. So this is the principle. articulate it like a simple rule. And then the third one, how can we move forward? Put it in practice. How would you design a simple rule to put it in practice? So before we thought that, then we realized that, and now we do this or that. And if I worked with this framework with practitioners, and really the more you leave them time to digest, perhaps a failure they did not digest. They, for instance, like Bingham and Haleblian said, if there's external attribution, if they think that it was the market or the clients were not ready or something, they don't learn anything. If they think they are somehow, and sometimes this framework makes them think so, they are responsible for the failure, then this structures the way they might learn something from their failures. And this is powerful because if you learn a simple rules from somebody else, or let's say from a book, as opposed to learning from your own experience and negative experience, you will hold to it, and if it will guide better your behavior. So perhaps applying this simple framework, I did not embed AI, but in fact, I'm trying to do this in a course that I will teach in just a few days, with having ChatGPT acting as a coach. So you are my coach, you are my colleague with more experience, and we both distill this reflection on this failure. Can we use this framework? Ask me using this framework how to make sense of it, and perhaps it can work as well in the absence of a mentor or of a senior or of a coach.
Thank you for the very concrete answer.
Thank you very much.
I invite Dr. Rauch to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Rector, for allowing me to ask a second question. With my second question, I'd like to build on the conversation that we had so far. So I will be asking on the authority of the rector and by the virtue of my right. I'd like you to elaborate and reflect on the conceptual methodological difference between the various concepts that you're using, from heuristic, simple rules, but then we also have routines and decision rules, and maybe to paint a little bit of a picture of when do I see a heuristic, or when is it not a heuristic or a simple rule?
Land opponent, thank you. This is something that preoccupies us and myself especially, and this is something I urge. Let's have the whole community decide on which is which. Artinger and his collaborators in his literature review made a specific difference, and I will go directly to routines, made a specific difference between heuristics and routines. And routines differ from heuristics by being more complex, having more, let's say, criteria or cues, and being applied in as a process and not necessarily as a, let's say, a moment or decision-making moment. It's a way sometimes, perhaps if I can build on what they propose, it's a way to embed simple rules or heuristics into practice. So a routine might be how the decision was already made, or we see that it goes like this. We don't even need the simple rule anymore, unless just for guiding the routine. In terms of heuristics versus simple rules, I discovered that the name simple rules, which is homonymous with the stream proposed by Eisenhardt, Searle, and Bingham, was not part of the heuristics literature at first. So their first article in the Harvard Business Review in 2001, I think it was Eisenhardt and Searle, they proposed simple rules, and they are exactly what they continuously developed over the last 22 years. They did not connect it to the heuristics literature. And one might say that perhaps they're not the same concept. Simple rules in the initial, let's say, understanding, and in the continuous understanding of Bingham and collaborators and Eisenhardt research are not exactly heuristics. But if we understand heuristics, or as let's say, guides which use less resources. That means not only cues, not only criteria, but for instance, mental effort or attention in order to reach good enough solutions, then they are. So it's a large enough domain, so they qualify as heuristics. And obviously, I am not the one to judge. I think this literature which I addressed and I live in, like a researcher, fits very well. As decision rules, on the other hand, and this is where we go to Gigerenz's understanding of very, very structured in 3 steps understanding of rules as decision-making. What a simple rule does, as opposed to a fast and frugal rule, although most fast and frugal rules researched recently are not necessarily instinctual, but are simple rules. But what a simple rule does is go beyond the decision-making process. So it has this, all the other roles, for instance, in organizing, in communication, in alignment. This is not a decision-making process. These are obviously everything is a decision-making process, but this is not a dilemma that we have, and we apply the simple rule. If a CEO understands a simple rule, for instance, the 2-pizza rule, I found in other respondents, they had no idea about the Amazon rule. They had the same. When a team reaches 10, split it and put 2 managers in charge. So it does not function with more than 10. They are not simplistic, and they are not decision-making anymore. So it's when it goes into a routine, for instance. Yeah. So perhaps in a timeline, and in on the other axis would be the domain of effect. They vary. So perhaps heuristics are the whole thing. In a timeline, perhaps routines are how they are applied, and they differ in the domain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Cornelissen, if you have a dense question, then it can still be answered.
I hope so. Dear candidate, on the authority of the rector and by virtue of my right, so what I find really interesting is building on the questions that have been asked, is that you really are interested in this question of how heuristics might help managers and how they get the job done, both individually as well as collectively. One thing I was thinking about, but maybe this is beyond what you've done here, but I'm going to ask the question nonetheless, is what about looking at this from a critical perspective? And then I don't mean the negative heuristic as a sort of deviation from a rational baseline, but you have examples from Jack Welch, you have examples from Peter Thiel. You know, these maxims that they used are now critically being examined and looked at again in terms of divisive consequences, the ideology that they portrayed, some of the guiding philosophy that they operated from. So would there not also be important, if we look at these heuristics, also to look at them critically? I know that's maybe beyond the thesis, but is this something that you've thought about?
It's not. I have learned opponent. Thank you for this. I will be very, very brief. I believe that they reflect the subjectivity and the personality, the stage in development of a person. Therefore, they can be obviously analyzed and shaped by society into not being there anymore if they are detrimental, or into turning themselves, which is even better, flipping themselves into better ones that fit a leadership role, which obviously is in line with being constructive and open to others. Now that my defense has ended, I sincerely thank the opponents for the attention they have devoted to my thesis. I now look forward to the decision of the doctoral examination committee in the School of Business and Economics, which will decide whether the degree of Doctor of Philosophy will be granted to me.
I hereby adjourn the public meeting of the Doctoral Examination Committee of the School of Business and Economics for further deliberations.
Please stand.
Please be seated. I reopen this public session. By its duly accorded authority, the Doctoral Examination Committee of the School of Business and Economics grants the degree of Doctor of Philosophy to Radu Atanasiu, and therefore I invite the supervisors and co-supervisors to place their signatures to the degree certificate as a witness of this deed. And before they do so, I would also like to announce that the degree has been bestowed upon the candidate Cum Laude. Yeah. I declare that here in public that in the privacy of the closed session, the candidate by a signature stated adherence to the conditions laid down in the provisions in Article 5 of the doctoral regulations of this university regarding rights and responsibilities in society and science. Professor Kapova will now do the bestowing of the degree, after which Professor Wickert will do the laudatio. During the bestowing of the degree, only the doctoral examination committee will stand.
By the virtue of the authority vested in me and by the statute of the Vrije Universiteit and as supervisor appointed thereto by the College of Deans, I hereby confer on you, Radu Atanasiu, the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, together with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereto appertaining. In witness thereof, the seal of the university and signatures of the rector and the supervisors have been affixed to the diploma you are about to receive.
So, dear esteemed members of the committee, dear audience, dear Radu, it comes with the greatest pleasure, really, that I can stand here at this moment to celebrate a remarkable achievement and the end of a journey, right? Congratulations. I think you can be extremely proud of what you have achieved in the past few years, and we have seen this evidenced by the Cum Laude degree that you have gotten. In fact, I should point out that that your dissertation is of exceptional quality. We've seen this, and you defended it with exceptional quality as well. It's also evidenced by multiple, not only one, but multiple scientific publications in scholarly journals that you have achieved throughout the journey. For example, long before you actually finished the PhD today, you managed to publish an article in Journal of Management Studies, which is one of the most prestigious and also one of the most difficult journals to publish in. And it has one of the highest reputations in our field. This is a remarkable achievement, I think. And what is also remarkable is that while doing this scholarly and scientific work, you also managed to create real impact with your work based on the knowledge and the insights you have gained with your research. For example, by translating your findings for practice, circulating them through the media, and also using your insights in MBA education, just like a true academic, right? But it was not only a journey of remarkable scholarly achievements, it was also fun. Not only for me as a supervisor of your thesis, but I'm quite convinced also for you while you worked on it. So thank you for this and for your company. I think you're actually one of the few persons I know who does very serious things by not taking them too serious. And I mean this in the most positive manner. This is because you seem to be doing everything with a smile on your face. And that is great. There's hardly anything that's holding you back from delivering excellent results. You just smile and keep going. An inspiration for all of us, I think. And because you study heuristics and simple rules, I try to distill a simple rule from this approach, which I admire very much. Maybe it is every mistake you make is an opportunity for a joke about it, right? This doesn't at all mean that you're making a lot of mistakes, but if you do, like we all do all the time, it doesn't seem to bother you a whole lot. Instead, you simply keep going, and the joke gives you the necessary pleasure to enjoy what you're doing. I hope you can retain this spirit. It is also great to see, to conclude, that you intend to continue spending time on research. I say this because it means I can continue hanging out with a friend. Let's celebrate your achievement now. Thank you.
To the congratulations of the supervisor, I gladly also add the congratulations of the Council of Deans of this university. We are very happy to have you as a graduate of this university and also as a graduate of the School of Business and Economics and of the ABRI, like the Amsterdam Business Research Institute, to which your thesis does great honor. I will remember your thesis on simple rules as one-liners that work, all right? And of course, it leaves me in a great predicament because one of the one-liners that you quoted is that great conclusions on a paper should be on page 35. And I think my papers typically stop at page 30. So I will never have great conclusions, the conclusion of that. All right. After this ceremony, there will be a reception. And in order to close this ceremony, I ask you all to stand up. I close this public session of the Doctoral Examination Committee of the School of Business and Economics. May our search for truth and wisdom be of service to the flourishing of the world and humankind.